Well, thank you, Frank. The reality of it is this is a spiritual war, and you heard both Dr. Lin and General Quast share that. It's a spiritual war manifesting as an economic war, and it's going to spill out into a health war with the coronavirus risks and the pandemic. It's going to spill out into potentially a military shooting war if we're not careful. I've got some statistics here. I've been studying Unrestricted Warfare, which is a book published by two senior colonels of the People's Liberation Army in 1999. And I want to set the stage for you about 1999 versus today. You know, we're just 2 decades later. In 1999, China was the world's 7th largest economy, 7th largest behind Italy and just above Canada. It was about 1/10 the size of the United States economy. And it was literally, today, in Texas, the Texas economy today is 50% larger than the Chinese economy was just 20 years ago. Just Texas. So what has happened over the last 20 years that has made it possible for China to achieve all of these things, the Space Force, the control of their people, and all of that? Well, essentially, it's unrestricted warfare. This is literally the playbook. It includes cyber theft and hacking, which we're all aware of. I mean, you see repeatedly who hacked Equifax. It was the Chinese. It includes taking over most favored nation status here in the United States through massive lobbying in Congress, but also taking over global organizations and using monetary means, bribes, and encouragements to get global organizations. It includes intellectual property theft, currency manipulation. It includes Western investment, predatory trade practices, forced technology transfers. You see, China realizes that this is an economic war. They knew that as the 7th largest economy in the world, they would never be able to achieve their objective of being the dominant power within 100 years of the establishment of the Communist Party, which is coming up in 2045. And I also want to point out to you that the threat is very immediate, and it's immediate because of this. China realizes that you can commit an atrocity and 20 years later the world will forgive and forget. And sadly, the Tiananmen Square massacre was an example of that. They were hosting the Olympics, worldwide attention at the Beijing Summer Olympics 20 years after that massacre. And they realized that people today have long forgotten 9/11, which is less than 20 years ago. People, 9/11, yeah, that was that bad thing that happened a while back. They realize 20 years. That means that they have to commit whatever atrocities they want to commit by the year 2025 so that they can be in the dominant position no later than 2045. This is a part of the Chinese plan. You see, what we see as a marketplace, which is stock markets and investing and developing global interconnectedness, they see that as a battle space. And that's the mantra of the economic war room. I mean, every topic that we've talked about, we've covered on our show at one time or another, including the organ harvesting and how that's an economic weapon. They're taking their dissidents and they're literally taking organs and selling them for hard cash. Here, I'm going to read a quote from Unrestricted Warfare. Thus, financial warfare is a form of non-military warfare which is just as terribly destructive as a bloody war, but in which no actual blood is shed. We believe that before long, financial warfare will undoubtedly be an entry in the various types of dictionaries of official military jargon. Moreover, when people revise the history books on warfare in the early 21st century, the section on financial warfare will command the reader's utmost attention. The main protagonist in this section of the history book will not be a statesman, nor a military strategist, but it will be George Soros. The Chinese Communist Party has patterned their methodology of economic or financial warfare after George Soros, which includes manipulating financial markets. It includes using money as a weapon. They said the goal should be to use all means whatsoever, means that involve military power and means that do not involve military power, to force the enemy to serve one's own interests. And boy, have they taken that to heart. You see, there are just a few examples I'll give you, but they've been weaponizing the money of the American people and the United States government and American corporations, and they've been gathering it together and using it under their control to do all of these horrible things, including stealing our technology, stealing our industry, building a space force, and persecuting their own people. One example, it's one that we talked about, and now it's a little over 5 years ago, and that was the largest IPO in history to that date, Alibaba. Alibaba is, I don't know how to describe it. Think of it as an eBay and Amazon of China all rolled into one. And you think, well, that's good. It's free enterprise. It's commerce. This is good. It should be good for the people. What you don't realize is that Jack Ma, the founder of Alibaba, was tied to the Chinese Communist Party, and it is used as a weapon against the rest of the world. And how did they do it? Well, they IPO'd $25 billion. They raised capital from our markets on the New York Stock Exchange, something the Hong Kong Stock Exchange would not allow because there was no transparency, no corporate governance, none of the things that would protect the shareholder were present. And they sold us shares in a Cayman Islands corporation that's called a variable interest entity. And a variable interest entity is literally a non-existent thing. They don't have any shareholder rights. They have no control of anything. And if the government allows, they may receive dividends or economic benefit from the shares, the underlying shares. But no non-Chinese can own Chinese corporations. So they created this, raised $25 billion. Then what did they do with the money? They took the money that we gave them and bought up companies in Silicon Valley. So what they weren't stealing, what they weren't committing forced technology transfers, they were actually buying with the money that we presented to them. So some of the best and newest technologies that were emerging out of our innovative labs in Silicon Valley were being bought by a Chinese company and used for the benefit of the Chinese government. Now here's what's worst about it, is that we have no idea what that company is doing. They don't submit themselves to GAAP accounting, the generally accepted accounting principles, GAAP, GAAP. They don't submit themselves to our accounting. In fact, they say that Chinese companies' accounting is a national security asset and they don't release. We don't have good transparency to know if these are good investments or bad. I read an article just a couple of days ago where on the big day that they have it's like Amazon Prime Day, the version in China, that they discount if something costs $5 and they discount it to $3, they count $5 of revenues. You couldn't do that in America. That's not legal. That's manipulation. We have no idea if Alibaba is doing a good thing or not. But Alibaba's not alone. I'm going to quote our colleague Roger Robinson, who's spoken at a number of these events. He says, China has over 700 companies in their stock and bond markets or capital markets. It has about 86 companies listed on the New York Stock Exchange, about 62 in the NASDAQ, and over 500 in the murky, poorly regulated over-the-counter market. Among these companies are some egregious bad actors, like Hikvision, for example, responsible for facial recognition technology that identifies and monitors the movement of the ethnic Uyghurs. It also produces the surveillance cameras placed atop the walls of the Chinese concentration camp holding as many as 2 million Muslims. Both its parent company and Hikvision itself are on the U.S. Commerce Department entity list, what many describe as the blacklist. We've sanctioned companies, and yet we're putting these companies on our stock exchange where you all have invested in them through index funds and other things. Now I'm going to take you to one step beyond that, which is one step worse, and something the Committee on the Present Danger has been exposing. The Thrift Savings Plan of the United States. That is a 5.7 million enrollees, $578 billion in assets. 50 billion of that is allocated internationally. And it traditionally has gone into the EFA index, Europe, Australasia, Far East, developed countries around the world. So it's good. You're getting international exposure. I work for John Templeton, probably the pioneer of international investing. I think it's a good thing to invest internationally. However, they've convinced the committee to change from the EFA index to the MSCI All-Country World Index. What that means is that all of a sudden the Thrift Savings Plan, that $50 billion, is going to be invested in a different index that includes China. And then they lobbied the MSCI to increase the Chinese weighting dramatically. And so our servicemen and women, our veterans, our patriotic employees of the government, and our retirees are going to be investing in Chinese companies, many of which have ties to the Communist Party or the People's Liberation Army, and can use that money to weaponize against us. They may be building weapons that our servicemen and women are investing money in the weapons being built aimed at them. It's tragic. Not only that, but Article 7 of the National Intelligence Law of China allows every commercial entity to be instantly weaponized to commit espionage, technology theft, or whatever else is deemed to be in China's national interest by simple order of the government. That's a matter of public record. In other words, the Chinese Communist Party at any time can take any Chinese company and make them do whatever they want. And unfortunately, they do the same for American companies operating in China. And if you don't believe it, look at the history of Google going into China and then coming out because they wouldn't do what China wanted. Now they've gone back in. Here's another example, BlackRock and Larry Fink. There's an excellent letter that was written by Chris Acavella, the CEO of the American Securities Association, to the Securities Exchange Commission, where he makes this point. BlackRock is pretty well known. It's $7.4 trillion of assets, the largest asset manager in the world, $7.4 trillion. It's enormous. They're pretty well known because the CEO, Larry Fink, recently came out and said, we're no longer going to make returns given to our investors, the gains that you can make in the stock market, as our only goal and motive. From now on, we're going to start worrying about things that are good for society from his viewpoint. It's a part of the ESG movement, which is environmental social governance. And so he says, we're going to take your money and we're going to invest it so that we take care of climate crisis, climate change, and we're going to address that. We're going to make sure that every board has proper representation. So it's got to have women on the board, and they've got to have, they're going to mandate the companies that they invest in basically follow their line, which is kind of like what the Communist Party does. And corporate governance, we're going to hold to that. And yet, Larry Fink has also publicly said, as documented in the Wall Street Journal, we're going to make China our #1 priority. We're going to grow in China as much as possible. We're going to invest in China as much as possible. Think about the hypocrisy of that. When BlackRock says we're going to make environmental one of our top motives, the Chinese Communist Party and the Chinese nation is one of the worst polluters on the planet. They don't treat their society well. They don't offer fairness. If you are a dissident, you could have your organs harvested and sold. And they don't allow any corporate governance from the perspective of a shareholder. This is what the Chinese Communist Party has done. They have weaponized capital. They've gone into Wall Street, and they've gotten everybody excited about getting fees on the largest IPO in history, Alibaba, and they made hundreds of millions of dollars. And Wall Street has essentially sided with the Chinese Communist Party against Main Street America, against our interests. And we're being held to a different strategy, a different level of responsibility. The bottom line, the Chinese Communist Party is practicing unrestricted warfare. They're undermining our stock markets, and they've weaponized our money against us. Now, I have good things to share here. We have a solution. We need to weaponize American capital to protect America. The Pentagon recognizes this. The Pentagon realizes that a lot of the technologies we need for our military have been bought up by our adversaries and potential enemies. And so they've started a patriotic investors program where they're going to vet capital to make sure that when we're investing in that new military technology or capability, that it has patriotic Americans behind it and it is not something that's being siphoned off by China. This is a serious problem that they've recognized. It's also a huge opportunity for us as Americans because the innovation labs are here. We understand how to invest in innovation. So there's a group called AFWorks. They have 1,200 entrepreneurs and investors that need private funding, modeled after the Doolittle Institute, that would like to partner with some government money and some private funding to meet the needs of our military. And I had the opportunity to interview General Quast yesterday for an economic war room program. We talked about one of those projects where Shannon Stuckenberg has invented a new way to get water from air that doesn't cause pollution, doesn't desalinate and put too much salt in the ocean, it doesn't have any of the problems in obtaining water, and that is the type of investment an innovative American entrepreneur, and I can tell you the Chinese have been in trying to buy that technology or invest in it so they could co-opt it. It's just one example. We need those innovations. Wall Street is a risk because they have deep China connections. So we enter with the NSIC Institute, National Security Investment Consultant Institute. It's a program that my colleagues and I started a few years back. Frank Gaffney's been a part of this. We want to help investments get patriotically placed. And how do we do that? Well, you don't know how to evaluate these. As an individual investor, it's hard to say, is this Chinese-led, Chinese-controlled, is this patriotic, is this helpful? So we're training financial advisors, stockbrokers, financial planners, investment advisors. We want them to understand how to delineate between investments that will be good for the world on our side of the spiritual battle, that would be liberty-enhancing, and those that might have already fallen prey to Chinese control. So NSIC.org, National Security Investment Consultant. You can learn about some of this on the episode's Economic War Room at economicwarroom.com. We have an action plan that we'll put an action plan, a battle plan from this event together, and we'll make that available for you. And what we see as a marketplace, our enemies view as a battle space, and that's happening right now. So if you got a financial advisor, tell them to go to nsic.org. We're partnering with Liberty University to get this message out. We want to promote liberty, personal economic liberty. We want to promote security, national security, cyber security, personal security, and values, those Western civilization, Judeo-Christian values that uphold the traditions of the United States of America. So that's the problem. China's funding everything and controlling. The solution, we take our money back, we weaponize it, and we make it for liberty. Thanks, Frank.